Hello again, everyone. I hope you all met and learned an interesting fact about them, or at the very least said hello and told them what you do. Welcome along. As I said before, this is the fifth of our events that we're hosting during Future.now's Digital Skills Week. I'm really excited for this one because I sit here with two hats for you now. I work for Future.now, something I'm really proud to say that I do, but I also work for Lloyds Banking Group, and I have done for a number of years now. And for those of you who sit within the digital skills space, you'll know that today is a really big day for us here at Lloyds Banking Group because it was the publishing of our 2020 Consumer Digital Index. So that we'll delve into some of the discussions around that with Gemma, who you can see on stage with me at the moment. But in the meantime, I just wanted to say hello, welcome from Future.now, welcome from Lloyds Banking Group. If you've got any questions, please do put them on the right-hand side of your screen. You'll see the chat function there. We're going to move to a panel a little bit later, and I really want to encourage you guys to ask questions. I think these things are always better when they're a conversation and when it's not just us asking the conversations we've pre-agreed. And to be honest with you, the panel scene, let's surprise them. Let's get them answering some interesting questions that you've got that we won't have thought of, because those are always more fun and more interesting for anyone. For everyone. So in terms of what the day will look like, just try and move on to the next slide. We've got a welcome from myself, as you can see. If you ever want to enlarge any of the slides that you can see in front of you, there are some arrows in the top right-hand corner of the screen. If you click those, the slides will expand and you'll be able to see some of the detail that's on there. So you've got me saying hello, welcoming you to this event. Following me, you're going to have Gemma Waters, who's the Head of Responsible Transformation at Lloyds Banking Group, who's going to bring to life some of the Consumer Digital Index statistics. We're going to be followed by a digital workforce panel. And I know folks who go to a lot of events often see the same sort of people and hear the same sort of stuff, but I'm really excited to say that I think we've got a really honest panel of what I'd call real employees. And I don't mean that flippantly, but I think they're people who I wouldn't expect to hear from an event like this. And they're here to give us their honest and open viewpoints about their own experiences of workforce digital skills. So workforce digital skills are going to be the focus of today's session. The Consumer Digital Index that Gemma will speak to in a second focuses on a whole range of digital foundational skills, life skills and work skills. But this being hosted by Future.now, we've got a real commitment to upskill the UK workforce. Gemma can talk you through some of the clear benefits as to why we'll do that. But please do engage with us. Please do write on the right-hand side of the chat column. Any issues with sound or vision, do drop it in there as well, and our assistants will come along and help you out in a matter of seconds. So without any further ado whatsoever, I'm going to hand over to Gemma, who's going to talk us through the 2020 Consumer Digital Index and our workforce findings. Gemma, over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Adam. Thanks for the introduction. So as Adam said, I've got the good fortune of looking after the responsible transformation team at Lloyds Banking Group. And one of the key deliverables, things that we do, is our digital index suite of reports, in which we utilise our transactional data and also attitudinal surveys to understand how the UK thinks and feels about their digital capability, what it is that they're doing online, and what's the scale of their digital ambition. So as Adam says, this morning we launched the 2020 Digital Index and the headline figures of the UK's digital skills and capabilities. So in this morning session, we focus primarily around the inclusion aspect, so that more kind of foundational level of access, and also the aspects around people's day-to-day lives. So right now, I'm delighted to be speaking to you as part of Future.now's Digital Skills Week. And in today's session, as Adam mentioned, we'll be sharing our insights into the digital skills of the workforce specifically. So it's worth mentioning that clearly this index presents a real, and captures a real moment in time. So the data was taken just prior to the current crisis, and from now we'll be able to tell going forward the impact of COVID-19 on people's digitisation, because we've got that baseline. But also really conscious that, in order to address the fact that there's been some real behavioural change, we've also complemented our annual measure with a snapshot of tactical research just to help us understand how the crisis is changing consumer behaviour. So for those of us fortunate enough for us to be able to work from home at the moment, it's certainly taken quite a bit of readjustment and remote setups, but clearly for key workers and those on furlough, the landscape is just completely different. So in terms of the report and kind of the Lloyd's relationship with Future.now, so we're really proud to be a founding partner of Future.now and working with other coalition members to understand the needs of different workforces in different sectors and the universal opportunities for all of them coming together. So as Adam said, we'll talk to you a little bit about some of the headline figures from this morning, but then there's a chance to talk in more detail about the workforce at large. So at the most fundamental digital skills level, this year's index tells us that an estimated 9 million UK adults struggle to use the internet and their device by themselves. So that point around by themselves is so key, because clearly during this time of social distancing, the face-to-face support that people may need to help them become comfortable and confident online at the moment is just not available. And the data this year has shown some really interesting demographic insights too. So considering that foundation group, but also considering the broader 11.6 million people who lack the essential digital skills for life. Actually understanding that group, certainly we know that for the elderly population, they're the least likely to be able to access the internet. But I think relevant to this discussion today, it's really interesting to consider that actually 44% of those offline are under the age of 60. So this isn't something that we can dismiss as a generational challenge. And I guess what our research has also shown is that the barriers for those people under the age of 60 are largely about cost, access, and opportunity. And I imagine that those are some of the themes that we'll talk about and discuss today. So in terms of kind of the day-to-day life skills, as I mentioned, 9 million people struggle to get online by themselves, and there's in total, therefore, about 11, closer to 12 million people who lack essential digital skills for life. But what does that mean for the workforce? So clearly, a lot of people who aren't able to do some of those basic tasks in their day-to-day life and will not be able to do some of the more complex things expected of them for work. And I think what we're seeing this year is that the UK workforce, unfortunately, is still really digitally underpowered. And I think one of the conversations that we'll need to have today going forward, and certainly has been on our minds at Future.now for quite a while now, is actually how can we provide that support across workforces, across different sectors to unlock productivity for UK industry. So in total, in 2020, as I say, pre-COVID, but nonetheless, 17.2 million people in the workforce lack the ability to do some of the things that I imagine many of us here on this call today would take for granted. So that's things like saving documents, using the cloud, changing passwords, saving files in different locations. And what that means is both the individual and also the organisation as well are really missing out as a result. So it's not all bleak. So the good news is that in the last 12 months, we've seen 100,000 more people have improved their digital skills at work, which is great. But crucially, there's still 1.8 million people at the starting blocks with the foundations of getting in line. So as I mentioned at the start, with the 9 million people in the UK today who struggle to access the foundations of getting online day to day, 1.8 million people within that group are part of the workforce and will struggle to access an app, connect to a Wi-Fi, turn on a device. And it's really crucial to think about that sector difference as well, to try and understand where that might be driven. So we can see from the data that organisations in the retail, the manufacturing, the construction sectors, for example, those are the areas and those are the industries where there's the greatest challenge. So in some instances, that might be driven by the fact that, you know, an individual might not to do some of those tasks every day. But I think, again, when we revisit what are the tasks that we're expecting people to be able to do, it's things like requiring, having the ability to print, having the ability to share files, the ability to send emails. And I suppose the very purpose and the very core of the Essential Digital Skills for Work framework is that we benchmarked with a number of different industries and a number of different sectors to help us understand, the relevancy of these tasks to everyone in the everyday of work. So whether you are a farmer, a policeman, whether you work in an office, there will increasingly be the need to check the app for the weather. If you're a farmer, to use Google Maps to get to where you need to go. There's so many countless examples of where digital skills can be so key to so many. And the thing is as well is that the benefits are really clear to see. So we know that digital capability can unlock people's potential in their professional lives. So when we consider the more highly digital end of the spectrum, so we know that 61% of highly digital citizens have used the internet to successfully apply for a job, and 71% say that it has helped them to improve their future work prospects through online learning, training, seeking new roles. So we know from contextual data that over 2/3 of roles today now require digital capability of some kind on a day-to-day basis. I suppose what this data indicates is that it will be the digitally savvy who will pip others to the post. So how can we help make sure that everyone has the same opportunities? And it's not about just getting a job and finding a new role. There's both time and financial benefits to having digital skills in the workplace. So for example, people who feel their digital skills have improved since 2019, they've let us know that they're saving on average over 7 hours a week in both their personal and working lives, which again, that's almost a full working day. It's not to be underestimated for sure. We also know that digitally enabled manual workers, so those that perhaps you wouldn't expect to see the greatest benefit, not in an office environment. Actually, when we looked at, people with the same role type within the same region, theoretically, all those other factors are the same. Those who have the higher digital enablement are likely to earn over £2,000 a year more. And clearly, there's lots of other factors to explore there, but nonetheless, that's a massive difference to someone on an annual basis. So what's the route to this? One of the things that we've explored in this report, as with last year, when we first took on the Essential Digital Skills measure as well, is, where are people getting training and support? What does that look like? So we know by and large that around 80% of people who have improved their digital skills have done through themselves. So it relies significantly on people's kind of motivation, but also the opportunities that they have in order to get that support. Our concern at the moment is obviously with social distancing measures in place, how can we meet people where they need to be met to provide that support? I think that's a really big consideration. But I think what's really interesting is considering the role of the employer. So in the last year, about 23% of people have received digital skills training and support from their employer. So, absolutely acknowledging that there is a proportion of the UK workforce who are self-employed, so around 15%. Nonetheless, less than a quarter of the UK workforce having received some kind of support digitally from their employer is a relatively low standard. And we also know that only 10% of employees who have improved their skills have been motivated to do so by their careers and their workplaces. So thinking about some of the conversations we've been having in Future.Now over the last kind of chunk of time, that's a really important point to consider. How might the organisations who are providing support broaden that out, that remit? How can we share things across the broader workforce and help make sure that everyone gets the same opportunities? And ultimately as well, there's almost a duty of care with people, remote working or facing some really challenging work situations at the moment. Digital is not just a way of doing your job better. It's not just a way of doing your task more efficiently or at a distance. It's also about the employee's well-being. And that's one of the things that we're certainly placing quite a lot of focus on Lloyds Banking Group at the moment. And I think it's one of the things within our research. We know that ultimately people with greater digital access and capability are using digital to, feel part of a community, connect with their loved ones, all of those really necessary points, particularly at times like this. And actually, it's also the same in the working environment. Current government guidelines have meant that some employers have had to go through a digital transformation overnight. But actually, it's not just about the kit and connectivity, but it's also the digital solutions that are available for colleagues' well-being, for their engagement, and things that then can, give them greater access into their personal lives as well. So, conscious of time, so that's just a bit of a flavour on some of the benefits. that having a digital workforce can bring, some of the challenges that we've identified, and then some of the statistics outlining, the scale of the challenge facing the workforce at the moment from a digitisation perspective. So with that, I'll just say a really quick thank you to the partners that have helped us, and Future.Now for organising the Digital Skills Week, and the partners that have helped us write and design the report. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to share some of our insight. I'll now hand over to Faye Van Vloot, who's going to introduce our employer panel.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. And I am Faye Van Vloot. I'm a Partnerships Manager from Lloyds Banking Group. I've got the absolute pleasure of hosting today's panel. Now that you've heard the kind of latest stats from this morning's index launch, I guess it's time to hear it from the people. So I'm really pleased to be joined by, and hopefully they will magically appear, James Osborne, who is a specialist rehab physiotherapist, Mark Temple, who's the founder of Digital Ministry, and Angela Wallace, who is a senior quality engineer from Lloyds Banking Group. Let's give them all a moment to jump on seamlessly as that. Just wait, here we go, here's Angela, amazing. Lovely, so firstly, thank you all for joining us on today's panel. We're going to talk about kind of what the workforce is really saying about digital, but before we do that, I just want to hand over to you guys to do a really quick introduction. So Angela, if I start with you first.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So firstly, it's great to be here. So as I was introduced, Angela Wallace, I've worked for Lloyds Banking Group for a little while now, probably coming into more my twilight zone of my career, I will liken it to later on. So certainly worked for the bank for a long period of time. And one of my interesting elements and why I'm really keen to be part of this is because working for one organisation for a period of time also brings some challenges because you do get institutionalized. So yeah, I want to bring that take out today.
Thank you. I will not call it the twilight zone of your career later on. James, if I can just pass over to you so quick.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thank you, Faye. So my name's James Osborne. As Faye said, I'm a specialist rehab physio with a particular interest in neurophysio and robotics for a company called More Rehab up in Yorkshire and in the middle of the country, really going into Derbyshire and Nottinghamshire. I suppose I've got a particular interest. Physio is a very tactile industry, and we don't often use technology. Even though I'm interested in robotics, we don't actually use technology in the background of the business. So hopefully I can share some of my experiences with that today.
Thank you very much, James. And then lastly, over to Mark for a quick help.
Yeah, hi everybody. My name's Mark Temple, as Faye said. I previously had the joy of working with the guys at Lloyds, and before setting up the Digital Ministry, which is a company that looks at growing social and business inclusivity through digital skills. So different perspective. I work very closely with the local enterprise partnerships around the country to help them with their digital strategy. And just as another side, I've just recently set up my own online centre to help rural North Yorkshire develop their digital skills and digital inclusivity. So there you go.
So we've got some fantastic kind of perspectives today. I'm really interested to hear from all of you. I'm going to hand over to Angela first because you've had quite an interesting career path so far, and you're an apprentice now. So I guess it would just be really helpful if you could kind of talk us through that that story and how you've kind of come to where you are at the minute.
Yeah, definitely. So I think this is a good story for anyone, really. You might go one way and think your career is going one way, and it zooms off in all different directions. So I started back in the bank over 26 years ago. I was on a contact centre, so I was on the mortgage helpline at the time. And basically, I turned into a subject matter expert for mortgages. So that kind of exposed me to the project world for the first time and really exposed me to IT systems. So up until that point, I'd really just been a user, and the screens we had back then were very simple, very easy. So you just used your system to kind of guide you, and it was a bit system says yes, system says no back then. I really got a buzz from actually doing change and making things better for our customers. So I then took a sideways move and went into project management. And that was all well and good, but after you've done a few projects, it felt very repetitive to me, and I wanted to get back to being more hands-on. So I then went, and I was fortunate enough to get a role running as it was back then, the Lloyds Mortgage website for Cheltenham and Gloucester Building Society. And I really, really enjoyed that because it was hands-on. It was very innovative at the time because we had a small team, so any problems that came out we dealt with immediately. It was kind of my first take on agile, which a lot of people are hearing about that workforce now. Now, for me to get that job, Lloyds kind of took a punt on me, really, because I didn't have the technical skills, I didn't have that background, but I got the job. And mainly I got the job because I think what Lloyd saw in me was the fact that I was an SME. So I knew my subject really, really well. Okay, I didn't have all the techie background, but I also had a team of people that could actually help me get those skills. And boy, did I use those. So to cut a very long story short, over the years, I've gone from there and now I've moved into quality engineering, which a lot of people say, well, what is that? So it's testing in old language. And basically, again, responsible for testing all of the mortgage systems across the bank. I've now just recently moved across to being responsible for the LBG platforms themselves. And I took the decision to actually go and do an apprenticeship. So it's very interesting. The reason I decided to do that was mainly because I felt, although I could decide what cloud applications to use, so I could do the strategy, I could do more the sort of senior decisions, I would say, I didn't know the basic foundations. And I felt that it would just make me a much more rounded person if I understood those foundations. So I've commenced on the apprenticeship and I think it's brilliant. So I'm sure we'll come back to that in a bit, Faye.
Yes, you absolutely took the words out of my mouth. We will certainly come back to that because I think it's fantastic to kind of see you taking the opportunity, which, you know, apprenticeships are amazing. And I think we're really trying to change the tide on the usual stereotypical kind of thoughts of what an apprenticeship is. So we will certainly come back to that. But I do want to hand over really quickly to James, because as you mentioned, you work in, you know, a very quite literally hands-on environment, and you know, as you mentioned, you probably aren't as close to digital as maybe some others are. So I guess over the past couple of years, and again we'll put a pin in COVID-19 because I'm sure that has hugely impacted on how you are working at the minute. But I guess pre that, if you can cast your mind back, how was your organisation kind of adapting to digital, and were you getting any support as an employee?
I suppose there's two aspects that, as you mentioned, very tactile industry, and 90% of your work's obviously done face-to-face and with hands-on treatment. Behind that, as you'll see when you go into hospitals, everything else is paperwork with piles of notes and things. So from that perspective, very low digital kind of interaction. But as a private company, we've had a lot of robotics, a lot of electrical. We use electrical stimulation and motorized bikes, so actually real top-end technology. So there's a big contrast between what I do for my day-to-day with patients, where I've got walking exoskeletons for my patients, but then I'm writing my notes down and trying to file them in a filing cabinet. We have tried to transition a little bit over the last 2 years, and we've been using some online notes and some online methods of monitoring outcomes. Having said that, it's still quite a challenge because what we need to monitor with regards to outcomes is quite hard to do well, we found it quite hard to do digitally anyway, and then passing that down through what is traditionally an industry where you work in the community and you don't have contact with each other. Actually training staff and you getting the training yourself is actually quite hard. And as physios, we prioritise our patients over learning digital skills. So actually we have got things in place which we've just not been very skilled at over the past couple of years. But as you say, things have developed rapidly over the last 8 weeks. I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit more. But we have had access. We've had access to digital things. We just don't use them, I would say.
Yeah. So there's probably a point from historically maybe not using things to their true kind of potential and getting the most out of them, which I think is probably true across most organisations. And kind of not just limited to yours. And I guess, how have you adapted, because it's the elephant in the room, we can't not talk about it, how have you adapted to kind of the coronavirus challenges that you've been facing?
Well, initially, very difficult. Obviously, treating somebody over a video call isn't that easy. But there's a few key things that you mentioned earlier on, even about training of elderly and those with maybe learning difficulties or cognitive. Actually, a lot of my patients have traumatic brain injuries. They might have had strokes that affects the cognitive. So I've had to learn how to use video conferencing, video calling myself, but then I've had to develop documents. I've had to teach my patients how to use that as well before I've even started my treatments with them. So yeah, very quickly we've had to, as a company, teach each other how to use video conferencing on various platforms. We've not just been using one, it depends what patients have access to.
Yeah.
But then it's been teaching the patients as well. I suppose as well, alongside that, it's given us as a company, and myself in particular, a chance to look back at those technologies we maybe weren't using effectively. So even things as simple as your Office 365, what the technologies within that, which has allowed our company to just come together a little bit more and communicate whilst at home, which previously we didn't do. We'd just meet in an office and talk things over. So yeah, very quickly we've had to learn how to communicate with each other, but also communicate with our patients, and how we are by no means rehabbing our patients at the minute, but we are helping them maintain. So when we
yeah.
put our hands on treatment. So yeah.
Yeah, you're still there. It's
Yeah.
just through a screen, much like we are today. And I think there's some really interesting points there on kind of how you've helped others as well. But I really would quickly want to just jump over to Mark, because as you mentioned earlier, Mark, you work really closely with, I guess, LEPs, local governments, and you really know what's going on the ground. And I guess I just wanted to get a flavour of, and what is the experience? Is it focused? Is it employees? What is the kind
of yeah, $1 million question, really, isn't it? I think generally speaking, it isn't employee focused. And I'm going to be very honest, and you asked me to be honest with this. I think the needs of the employees are generally what it says on the tin as far as the essential digital skills for work framework are concerned. The challenge there is that I don't think there's an awareness around the essential digital skills for work through the local authorities, through the LEPs, and through employers as well. Therefore, I think responses tend to be very reactive rather than proactive in terms of providing support to employers. I think capabilities across the country vary massively, as you see through the index, and there's regions within regions, and a lot of that's driven by social aspects and demographics. But I think there's also a big challenge around the messaging coming from central government. There's a big drive for them to push for level 3 and above skills, which drives the LEPs and the local authorities to gravitate towards that position, and therefore they ignore the real needs of the employees, which is, as we've seen from the report today, it's getting back to some of those basic foundation blocks. So broadly, there's a similar need across the country, but is we need to recognise what support's needed by the employee and be proactive in building programmes to suit that rather than suit the messaging from central government.
Mute there. No, I think, you know, it's certainly fair to say that from the index findings this year, the regional differences are quite stark, and I think there's definitely, like you say, areas of focus that maybe need a little bit more input. James, Angela, I wonder whether you can share, I guess, with us, is there anything that your employers have, you know, in terms of digital skills training? James, you mentioned that you kind of quickly just had to learn and kind of learn by doing. And I wondered whether that you have resources available to you. Is this something that...
I think we might have lost Faye.
Sure.
I will jump in Faye's absence. James, I think the question from Faye was about what sort of resources have you had available to yourself? Have you had to learn it all on your own steam? Have you had access to any academies or anything like that that have helped you to upskill both yourself and your other employees as well?
From an employee point of view, no, we've had no support, and generally we don't even have an IT department in our company. So, and that's a company with maybe 50, 55 employees. So no particular support over the last 2 years or recently. And in fact, I've used the Lloyds online training myself to try and upskill myself with certain aspects of that. Following on from using that training, I've been kind of tasked with the role of supporting the rest of the staff. So that has only started in the last 2 to 3 weeks, but it's an ongoing project. Yeah, so I'm learning on the job and trying to upskill others whilst I'm upskilling myself, basically. So the way I've done it is either self-learning or, like I said, I've been using the Lloyds online training as well.
Thank you. I didn't tell James to say that, by the way, just in case you're wondering. And I think one of the things we talk about in the Consumer Index a lot is this point about motivation. So a lot of what we talk about is employees getting the skills off the employers. But I think one of the things that needs to be there is that motivation within themselves. So Angela, you've come from a place where you've moved about, and I can sort of still sense that motivation within you. So I guess what was it that motivated you to become an apprentice and to take that next step? Because I'd be daunted going into the classroom again and doing online lectures and that kind of thing. So I guess what was it behind your motivation for wanting to upskill yourself?
So I think it's worth me saying that I was under no pressure to do this whatsoever. So my job, it wasn't really job dependent. However, what I did have is I had an interest, and I suppose that's the thing with Lloyds, and that's the one thing that I will say is if you've got an interest in something, they will actually help you. So for me, it was getting all those foundation skills, and because I was really motivated to get those foundation skills, I actually sought out to become the apprentice. And I think it does blend well for me, because it's actually taking me back to understanding those foundation skills, and then I can go, right, this is where I can use them. So when I was in that meeting 3 weeks ago and so was talking about this, I can see how I'm benefiting from it immediately. So it's not like a long course where you've got to do 3 to 4 years and then see the results. I'm seeing them instantly. The bit that I would say is you do have to be self-motivated, regardless of what route you go, whether it's something structured like an apprenticeship or whether it's like what James has said, where he's had to go out and almost self-learn and see what's out in the world. It's very similar. I think YouTube is my best friend at the moment. I'm getting so much information off that. However, the big downside for YouTube or Google for me is, and until you know what to search for exactly, you just get reams and reams of results. So that bit I am learning constantly as I go, but it's really motivating me because I can see how it's helping me in my day-to-day straight away.
Yeah, and I think it's stories like yours that can help us tell those stories to other colleagues, whether it's at Lloyds and hopefully beyond that as well, that upskilling shouldn't be something that feels like a chore. You should be able to see the benefits, both for you and if you're in a smaller organisation, hopefully your smaller organisation as well. So Mark, you deal less with organisations and employees and more with sort of governmental bodies and regional development agencies. I guess it's interesting to know, because this is a session focused on employees, if you see a slight mismatch between what employees want and ask for and what both local governments or local enterprise partnerships are delivering or are focusing on. Because I think often there's a desire to focus on AI and the big hot stuff, whereas actually it could be the basic things like online accounting, using the cloud to store documents. And that for me is quite an interesting mismatch that I'm seeing out there. The audio's a bit feedbacky. Do you want to try that again, or click mic on, mic off?
Is that any better for you?
Yeah.
I think the short answer was yes. I think generally there is a significant mismatch, and there's been a lack of awareness around the skill levels that are out there. So whether it's as an SME, whether it's as an employer, looking at their staff, as a LEP, looking at the local employment market, what are the skills like out there? And as mentioned before, I think a lot of the LEPs and local authorities have been driven to a certain place by government messaging, which in itself drives the wrong requirements. So we're not actually listening to the needs of the employee. And James has already touched upon it in terms of his business and where they were. So what we're seeing is a lack of provision that matches the employee's needs. And Gemma touched on it in the report highlights earlier on. I think 23% of employees have received support from employers, which needs addressing. So we need to understand what the driver is, why employers are not understanding what that driver is from the employees, and closing the gap there. And that's where the real support needs to drive, from LEPs to employers rather than straight to the employee. And I think from that we then get a bottom-up approach instead of the top-down approach that we've got at the moment. And that in itself will help create the foundation blocks for the future and allow the employees to grow as individuals, and also drive that social impact as well as the in the workplace impact. So it's all about developing the right offerings for the employee, listening to the employee rather than just making wild assumptions about where we are as a country.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think those motivational bits are so important, and I think understanding what employers are actually using and employees are actually using as well. So to the audience, I'm speaking to you now. There's no such thing as a free lunch. So what I'd like you guys to do now is to think of some questions to ask our lovely panel. We've got a real range of people here from different organisations and stages. So do please feel free to send some interesting questions through on the chat. I'll pose it to the guys and we'll do our best between the four of us and the technology as it stands. So while all those questions flood in on the chat, like I'm sure they will, I want to ask the panel if they were to give one piece of advice to someone 2 or 3 years ago, or I guess the digital developmental stage of 2 or 3 years ago, what would it be? So Angela, someone in a large corporation, James, someone maybe in a smaller one that doesn't use digital every day, and I guess Mark, someone who's dealing with government organisations, local government and LEPs. I guess what would you say? And I guess what sort of advice would you give? So Angela, I'll go to you first, if I may.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's been really interesting because I think people look at large organisations and think, right, we've got all the training, we've got all the support, we've got everything there because we are a big organisation. But by being that big organisation, you're usually pretty, and particularly a bank, we're pretty locked down on tech. So going back 2 years ago, there wasn't much we could do. We had certain systems, we could only do X, Y, and Z, and that's what you were taught, that's what you learned. There you go. There's then been an absolute explosion in the tech world. So we've got this thing called cloud now, we've got other stuff coming, all this exciting new words that we didn't know sort of 5 years ago. I think the big thing for me is don't write anyone off. Talk to your employers and employees, sorry, and understand what they want. I think it's really important as well, understanding what people do and don't know. And I think you shouldn't over or underestimate what people actually do know. And even what we did in our team originally when we were first starting to really get into new tech areas is we looked at the skills that we had in the team where we could buddy up. So it was doing very simple things like buddying and getting that knowledge out there. So I think the thing for me is just don't assume, and just grab whatever you can to really get into the new way of working.
So bottom up seems to be something we've heard a couple of times. I think there's something about the employer enabling their employees to learn. So I think clearly as a bank, we're going to have systems that are locked down and protected, but I think there's a balance between letting people develop themselves and giving them the opportunity to do that. So James, I'll go to you next. If you could speak to 2 years ago, James, what would you tell him in terms of using digital skills for your small organization?
Right. We're slightly different in the fact that we're a private company. We don't have maybe as many limitations as lockdown, however, within technology we use, but we do have the confidentiality aspect. And I suppose from a therapy and a physio point of view, that's often the fear of going into the technological world is the cloud secure, is the technology secure? So I think that's probably maybe traditionally why we've always been behind the times, because paperwork you can lock in a cupboard and leave it. So I think that's maybe why there's been that conflict between treatment technology and actual use of admin. I think for me, it goes back to your management and the leaders of the company giving the employees time to play with the technology and understand it. What we've had an opportunity over the last 8 weeks is to actually sit and play with the technology and see how it interacts and see how we can make things secure. So I think going back to 2 years ago, it would be one, investing a little bit more time in the employees to have the time to play with the technology, but then also some formal training on particularly the cloud documents, SharePoint and OneDrive in particular, on how you make them secure when we're using documents. We still have a lot of people that are worried about using those as documents, and that will be a challenge moving forwards. So I think for me, it'd be one, a bit of employee time just to play, and secondly, more formal training on cloud storage and security. I think that would help. That would open up the physio world to technology a little bit more.
And Mark, I'll ask you the same question, but as someone who's self-employed. So I guess you're an employee yourself, so you can't use the excuse that your employer is not helping you do it. So I guess what are you going to say to yourself as a self-employed individual? Sorry.
I think it makes you keep trying different things. It's the world is evolving rapidly, as we all know, and if you stand still in the modern world, you won't move forward. You'll just go backwards and you'll be left behind. So it's don't be frightened to embrace stuff. More businesses, especially the smaller end of the scale, need to try stuff in a safe environment, whether it's a test and burn approach, and do it quickly. And if it works, fabulous. If it doesn't, move on. It doesn't cost fortunes. Don't be afraid. And we've got to get out there and try it, because otherwise we will have stagnation and we'll go backwards as a country.
I agree. Okay, we've got a great question come through from Alice. So do we think this is something that's just COVID? So I guess we're all making changes. The fact that we're doing this online now as opposed to face-to-face is an obvious one. Do we think this is a sustained change of behaviour? So James and Mark, it'd be interesting to understand your points of view. Or do you think we'll go back to BAU, business as usual, as pre-COVID times?
I'll jump in there as James is on mute at the moment. And I guess what I'm seeing, Adam, is I'm working with several of the LEPs around the country at the moment, and through different skills programs, and therefore engaging with a lot of businesses, small businesses, and the drive for them is being driven by COVID-19. They're taking the opportunity now to reflect on what they were doing, what they are doing now, and how they're changing things. And I guess a bit like James's business, how they've moved that forward, and they're desperately keen to progress with that. So there's a massive demand out there at this point in time. I'd love to say for definite to Alice that it will be sustained, and I think a lot of that will depend on the messaging that comes out from the lefts locally to drive that interaction and engagement and make sure that the provision of support is there to make that change more sustainable. So whether it's with the help of Future.now and government, etc., that type of thing can really be driven and force the change upon others.
Brilliant, thank you, Mark. All right, what I'm going to do, we've got a load of questions. It's like London buses. We didn't have any and they've all come along at the same time. So Angela, I've got one from you that I'll chuck at you from David. So it's a question about working from home and don't want to go back to the old normal. You've been someone who's been a home worker for a long extended period of time. It'd be interested to know, has anything changed for you in working from home from being one of the few people that did it? And then what do you think about what the culture at work is going to be going forward?
Okay, I think that's quite a difficult and an interesting question, if I'm honest.
I do too. Apologies. Good luck.
So yes, thank you. So I think the first thing was the team that I work in is quite all over the place in the UK. And one thing, because I was predominantly a home worker, and we had 3 people in Scotland, we've got a few people in Wales, etc. Side of the desk conversations would happen, which I wouldn't be involved in because I'm not in that office. The one great thing that's happened since we've all been working from home is we've got much more tech savvy. So we're fortunate enough to have Microsoft Teams. So we use Teams for everything now, so our chats, our calls, and I'm not missing out on anything. So that's kind of, I suppose, one of my things is, if you have got someone who does work from home, just think about general conversation with them as well, because that can not just motivate, but I could have been missing opportunities that I wasn't aware of. So that was really good. The second part of the question, do I think things are going to change? Certainly from my team's perspective, we've already said that actually we want to keep the Teams chats going. We feel like we know each other a bit better now, which I think is a common theme from everybody going through this awful situation that we're in at the moment, because you're actually getting to know the human side of people, not just the workforce person. And I think what we've done is we've broken down some barriers where people might have been a bit afraid to say, I don't understand, I don't know how to use this tech, and just sort of been part of somebody else's PC, where they've been kind of forced to go, actually, I don't understand, can I have a bit of training? And, there's no shame in that, because everyone's got to start somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's great. It was a difficult question, so thank you. I think from my perspective, to your point, I think there's been a lot of sort of unforeseen benefits around working from home, whether it is getting to see people's living rooms. I've kept mine nice and quiet so you can't learn anything about me. But I think the fact that you are in people's homes has meant that there's a slightly different way of working. Right, James, a lot of questions for you. I've got one from Sam. So from a smaller size business, what would you see as some of the main benefits to embracing tech for you as an employee, to your patients? Because one of the things we say is hopefully it will mean you spend less time doing paperwork and more time helping who matters. And then what sort of changes will you see from that, do you think?
That's a big question and lots of aspects. So I think from my perspective and my colleagues as employees, what we would hope to see is that it brings us together. We've started using Microsoft Teams as well, like Angela mentioned, and actually we've started to work on documents, we started to work on lots of different projects within Teams, and we're spread, as I mentioned earlier, across Yorkshire and Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. And normally organising a meeting for us all would take maybe a month, 6 weeks to get us all together, whereas we're just jumping on there and getting things and working on those live. So I think from an employee, it'll make us feel a lot more efficient. We'll get things set up for patients a lot quicker. So I think it'll make us feel a lot more settled in our jobs, and then when we're going to see our patients, maybe not be thinking of all the other projects we've got to be doing. There's still lots of work to do, but certainly this starting to use it is showing some promising signs of how we can interact. From a patient point of view, there's actually a few aspects from physio. Firstly, as you said, it's freeing up some of our time to be able to offer more time to our patients, so we might have more patient time available. But we've actually found that certain patients are finding the benefit of doing classes online. They don't always have to drag themselves into clinic, or some patients may have a bad morning and not be able to get to an appointment. And prior to this, that would have been an appointment missed, whereas we will start to use the technology if they can't get in for whatever reason, a health reason, or the carer can't get in to bring them in that day. We will now be able to video call them, and still, it might not be the treatment they were going to have, but we can still offer them a level of support by using technology. And we wouldn't, I can hand on heart say, we wouldn't have done that at all in the past. So I think our patients will have a broader experience of what physio can be. And then outside of patients, we have care teams that look after patients, and actually the technology has helped us support those care teams much better. And we've been able to set up care packages much quicker as well within the private sector, because we can get the care team in quicker, and then we can video call in with the care team and do training almost as they're arriving at home, really. So I think going forward, we'll be able to get care in quicker and more efficiently than what we have done in the past, where it's taken a long time to upskill the carers that are looking after our patients.
Brilliant. And again, it's this motivation point, isn't it? And I think as people who work with digital skills the whole time and think about this point, whilst there's, you know, obviously massive societal changes that are happening through COVID, there are some real motivational things on the digital skills perspective that we're seeing as well. But we've got, it's 5 minutes to 3, so I think we'll probably wrap up there. I want to say thank you so much to the panel for joining us. I've loved it. I want to apologise that Faye's internet or her digital skills didn't quite work into getting her onto this thing. But on behalf of everyone who was here, thank you so much for joining me. So let's all give a virtual hand to my panel. Thank you for that. So all that's left for me to do is to say, I'm saying thank you, but what we're going to do is we're going to keep the tables open for another 15 minutes. So if you do want to have a conversation with myself, hopefully some of the panelists will be able to stick about. We'll be on some of the tables, so do just double click onto us and have a conversation with us there. There's been a number of you guys that have asked for the slides. So I know Gemma's going to send out some of the statistics slides, and she's going to pop those on her Twitter, but I'll send those through to email addresses that I've got as well. The full copy of the Lloyds Consumer Digital Index, if you Google it, it's right there, but it's also on lloydsbank.com, so you can find it there. And last thing for me to say is the last of our Future.Now Digital Skills Week events is tomorrow morning at 10, and that will round off Digital Skills Week for us. We've really enjoyed having you guys join us. I've really enjoyed the panel today. I found it inspiring and motivating in equal measure. And I want to say thank you, everyone, for dialing on, and for Digital Leaders for hosting this platform and bringing us together in a conference virtually. So thank you, and stick about for some more conversations, some more networking on the tables afterwards.